Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, back with our weekly Zeise is Right video with Post-Gazette columnist Paul Zeise, getting all his takes on the week's hot topics. Paul, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
I'm good. It's a lot of good sports talk, a lot of things going on in a lot of sports right now. So let's just get right into it, Paul, with the Steelers. Obviously, the NFL Combine's going on right now. Our Jerry Dulac, Ray Fittipaldo, Chris Carter are all out in Indianapolis. Jerry did his weekly chat with Post-Gazette readers on postgazette.com. I'll include the link to that down in the description. One of the more interesting questions he was asked in that chat was, why did the Steelers have the smallest coaching staff in the NFL? I think he said it was 14 coaches. Most other teams are around, the 20 mark these days. There's been a lot of criticism. A lot of people are unhappy with the state of the coaching staff for a variety of reasons. What do you think of the fact that they have a small staff and that there is, I think some teams might overdo it sometimes, Paul. I don't think you need 30 coaches. But don't you think it would be helpful if the Steelers had some more ideas in the room as well?
Well, I remember Nick Saban I remember when he joined the Dolphins and had the largest staff that was ever compiled. It didn't really do a whole lot for him, did it, Adam? I mean, he had literally had 26 coaches or something like that. To me, this is a classic off-season, need to talk about Steelers. And so people throw these kinds of things out and they get angry about it. It goes to show you, Adam, this is one more thing that confirms to me that the Steelers are king in this town and the NFL is king. That they can get people to talk about their league and their teams year round, and not just year round, but around the clock, and they can find things to talk about. Now, to your point, I think that the Steelers probably could use a couple of extra coaches and put them on staff, but they've got some support staff guys. I mean, I don't know if they're full-blown coaches, but they also have a number of guys that are interns or whatever, and a number of other guys that are around that are actually serving in some sort of coaching capacity. So it's hard to get a gauge on exactly what the number is of the people that are instructing the players. What I would say is when you look at their coaching staff, is the quality has to be, I think, better in some places. And I think that the quality of the guys that they go out and interview has to be better. I think that they've got to be willing to move some guys off their staff and bring other guys in, that when guys don't get the job done. Those are bigger concerns to me than how many. They hired, Randy Fichtner, mostly because he was Ben's friend. I mean, let's face it. Okay, that doesn't work out. They promote Matt Canada, mostly because he was there, right? Obviously bringing in Brian Flores was a little different for them, but that was a completely different situation. And frankly, that was a lot more about Mike Tomlin helping a young coach survive and revive his career, right? Because that was really what was at the point of that. But I mean, you look at a guy like Danny Smith. Every year I'm told that he's this legendary special teams coach. His special teams are terrible all the time. So at some point, why is he allowed to just continue to stay around forever and be here? So I would like to see them maybe do some things differently in the way that they hire coaches. I think that their coaching staff probably needs to be better than it actually is. But as far as the actual number, I don't know what the right number is. I know of this. If the rest of the league is doing 24, 25 coaches and you're doing, 18 or 17 or whatever they are, then maybe you should reevaluate. But if you're going to just continue to hire the same guys and be uninspiring in the way that you hire them, I'm not sure why, I'm not sure you could add, like you said, you could have 30 coaches and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of take both sides of that personally. Like, I think the Brian Flores thing worked. And I think if you can find guys like him to put in, positions where they matter and, they're not just like an analyst coming up with a few ideas to throw at the wall, but someone who actually has some say and some sway on the staff, I think they should be looking at adding more of those guys, getting more ideas in the room, not less.
Here's the thing. I agree with you. I thought it worked, but my point was what you're talking about is not why he was hired.
Right,
You know
I
what I'm
agree.
saying? He
They
was
happened
hired when he
into it
right.
another way, but I
My
think it was
point
an
is,
example.
it worked, and it was a great example of what we're talking about. Bringing in guys like him. You know, was it Jim Caldwell or somebody's name like that was thrown around as maybe bringing them in as like a senior offensive analyst or something? I mean, there was a couple of names like that thrown around. That wouldn't be a bad thing. The problem is you have egos involved, and then you would have to sort of go back or walk back a little bit on your pledge to keep Matt Canada in place. It's a little more complicated than that. So to me, it's about trying to actually go out and get some extra eyes on what you're looking at. But to me, it's the quality of those guys. I'm not interested in you adding new guys that just got fired elsewhere or got fired because they were incompetent or whatever. But if you're going to tell me, hey, I can bring in a guy like Jim Caldwell or some of the names and then all these offensive guys that are out there that have been thrown around, like, hey, why don't they talk about bringing him in? And even there was some talk, hey, when Eric Bieniemy was clearly going to leave Kansas City, how about the Steelers make him your senior offensive associate head coach or whatever and go from there. I'm all for those kind of hires. But the problem I've seen with the Steelers is, the problem I see with the Steelers is very simple, and that's their what I would call their hiring process and who they hire. It's quite often been very uninspiring.
Yeah, I'd like to see them get 2 good coaches instead. Like, it's not a numbers thing for me. Like you said, I'd like to see them get 2 good coaches instead of 5 just guys to just fill jobs, and I think we agree on that for sure. I look at someone like Byron Leftwich who's out there. He's won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady. He's got some ideas. Maybe he needs, some time to kind of sit back and not be the guy calling the plays to kind of figure some things out. Maybe that'd be a good guy to add here if Matt Canada doesn't work out next season. That's just kind of the realm that I'm looking in. Paul, another big Steelers topic that would seem to stick out in Jerry's chat to me today is I think you got 3 or 4 questions about why they can't just get rid of Mitch Trubisky and bring back Mason Rudolph, despite the fact that it seems very clear Mason Rudolph doesn't want to be here to be a backup anymore. There's still people clamoring for him, and there's still people who think that Mitch Trubisky was ineffective in his role last season. I think that kind of conversation is starting to get a little ridiculous, Paul, because I think Trubisky did what you asked him to do as a guy who came in, started the season, performed decently, and then gave way to a rookie. And then I think he performed admirably late in the season when he came in for Kenny Pickett. But there still seems to be this strong undercurrent against paying him to be the backup and having that security blanket as opposed to just cutting him loose and taking your chances with someone else. Where do you land on this continued, undercurrent against Mitch Trubisky?
Well, I mean, I think the thing about Mason Rudolph is if you can get him to stay, he's cheaper than Mitch Trubisky. That's the argument that you make, is that, hey, if Mason Rudolph is willing to stay and say, listen, you're not going to be the third string guy, you're going to be the backup this year, if you can convince that, I'm all for that. But like you said, I don't know that Mason Rudolph really wants to be here anymore. With respect to Trubisky, and here's what I'm going to say about the Steelers. They would be absolutely idiotic if they don't end up with either Mitch Trubisky or Mason Rudolph as their backup. Number one, they're the backup, okay? They're the backup. They're not the starter. Number two, they've both proven they can be good backups. They've both proven you can win games in very short, sample sizes or whatever, that they're good enough that they can win games for you. They're both veteran NFL guys who have played in the league and have played games. They're not, going to be rookies that, have never played. So you throw them in there like the Titans last year when they had to throw Malik Willis in and he clearly wasn't ready. And their entire season went south, right? You mean if the Titans had Mason Rudolph or, maybe even if they had Josh Dobbs earlier or, they had a guy like Mitch Trubisky, maybe they win a couple of those games that they just did. I mean, it was an embarrassment watching Malik Willis try to play quarterback. My point is, if you look around the league, if Mason Rudolph or Mitch Trubisky is your backup, you've got one of the top 10 backup situations in the league. Probably even higher than that. Probably like one of the top 7 or 8. Okay. And at the end of the day, you've got a guy in Trubisky or a guy in Rudolph that know the system, know the coaching staff, know the players and personnel, know the plays, know everything about what they're being asked to do. You have Kenny Pickett going into year 2 now. You've basically in one season, after losing a guy that you had for 17 or 18 years or whatever, Ben was your quarterback for. Remember, we were going to go into the dark ages after Ben. Remember that? All of that nonsense. The dark ages lasted about 8 games. And now you would go from that situation that you had at the beginning of last season with all the turmoil and questions about what's going to happen. You'd go from that to one of the most stable quarterback situations in the league, because you'd have your starter in place, a guy who played a lot of games for you last year and, and learned and got better and, theoretically with another offseason would get even better. You've got that in place and you have a backup in place, and you don't have to worry about addressing that position in the offseason in any other way other than if you feel like you need to take, a couple of undrafted free agent guys to figure out who your 4th arm in camp is going to be or whatever. My point is, if your hatred of Mitch Trubisky or Mason Rudolph is so great that you can't understand why they would have value to the Steelers, I don't know that I can help you. I mean, to me, it's a backup situation. If Kenny Pickett goes down and he's out for 12 games, you're probably not going to do much anyway, right? So, your backup you want is if Kenny Pickett goes out for 6 games or 4 games or 5 games or misses, throughout the season 4 or 5 games or a half here, a half there, that you've got a veteran guy who understands what it takes to win football games. To me, I think, now again, I would prefer Mason Rudolph because he's cheaper, and so it's less of a cap hit. But you can get away with Mitch Trubisky because you're not paying Kenny Pickett anything. So your total quarterback bill is still going to be about 10, 11 million bucks or whatever it's going to be, even if you have Mitch Trubisky. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing for me, Paul, is the total. Yeah, you can talk about Mitch Trubisky's cap hit, and maybe that's a bit of a luxury item, but the total quarterback spending is still very low, and you're still able to do. I think Omar Khan said yesterday the cap isn't going to be an issue for them, with what they want to do in free agency and considering all the draft capital they have to deploy this year. So, I think all the people worrying about the cap hit on Trubisky are probably just not in the same, universe of what the Steelers want to do, A, and B, what his spending is preventing them from doing. I think they'll be fine in that regard. Quick note I wanted to get to is our Ray Fittipaldo reported that negotiations have begun with Cam Sutton. Do you think that is a good first major move for this front office to be working on, as we start the offseason here?
Depends on the number, obviously, and how much money and years and all that other stuff. But here's the thing, Adam. They need corners. Cam Sutton's a pretty good corner. They're still going to have – what it does is basically takes the pressure for them to go out and find, multiple corners because you have one in place. But it doesn't change the fact they still need a cornerback 1 or a cornerback A or whatever you want to call it. They still need that guy. That guy is not on the roster. And as good as Cam Sutton is in his role, to be honest, they would be in much, much better shape if they were able to bring in another corner who is a legitimate number 1, right? And, there's a lot of ways you can go find those guys, although they don't grow on trees. But you bring in another corner and then say, Weatherspoon or one of these other guys becomes corner 2 and Cam Sutton goes back to the slot. The problem that you have there is you're not going to pay a slot corner, right, the same amount of money as you're going to pay one of your top 2 corners. And so Cam Sutton, it all comes down to expectations and how much they pay him. I would not overpay for him. I would not underpay him, but I would not overpay for him. But I also would not go into these negotiations with the idea that this is the only move that we have to make to solidify our quarterback position, because they still need that number 1 guy. And I think Cam Sutton is a really good, probably 2.5, if that makes sense. In other words, he's adequate as your 2. He's not bad as your 2. He's probably better as your 3, your slot guy. But if he's your 2, he's adequate. So he's somewhere in my mind between 2 and 3. He's going to want to get paid probably like a 1.5 probably, right? And that could become the problem. I just don't think they should overpay for him because he's good, but I don't know that he's that good. And I think that they can probably replace what he does if he were to walk. That being said, you'd like to have your own guy. You'd like to keep your own guy in house, and you'd like to be able to, a guy that you've developed. You'd like to, be able to continue to watch him develop.
Going around the world of sports, Paul, one of the big talking points today is Charles Barkley's rant about load management in the NBA. I think he called guys bums if they sit out games over the 82-game schedule to kind of get through. Arjo Starkey wrote, basically Charles Barkley's wrong and that load management is good because, it preserves players for the time that matters, which is the playoffs. Where do you land on this load management topic that is blowing up?
Well, I'm going to sound like old crotchety man, but I've got to understand this. We've got the best training, the best training methods we've ever had, the best treatment methods we've ever had, the best. We know the science of keeping your body healthy, the best nutrition we've ever had, right? These guys work out 24/7. They've got, a trainer, they've got a physical therapist, they've got this, they've got that. They understand how to keep their body. We understand a lot better sports science on how to keep bodies healthy and how to recover and all this other stuff. But all of a sudden now we can't play 82 games. Or we can't play 80 games, or we can't play 70. I mean, what is going to be the number? And to me, what is the point? If I'm paying you to play for me for 82 games and you're healthy, why am I going to sit you out 10 of them, right? To preserve. I mean, listen, again, I sound like crotchety old man, but in the 80s and the 70s and the 90s, those guys played every night. And guess what? The playoffs were pretty fun to watch. Remember a guy named Michael Jordan? Look at some of the years that the minutes that guy logged and how many minutes he played. And then look at the number of minutes he logged in the playoffs. And somehow, some way he was able to still perform. I hate the whole load management thing. I just think, again, I don't want to sound like crotchety old man. I am probably crotchety old man. But I think the load management thing is just sort of another one of these ways that we found to sort of coddle the new age modern athlete, right? And it's not good for fans. And B, my argument would be, okay, I'll tell you what, we'll give you as many games as you want off, but you get that you don't get a paycheck for that game. See how quickly the load management thing becomes. People still want to do load management stuff. It's one thing if you've got a guy like LeBron James, right, who's got leg problems right now, his foot is hurt. He's 38 years old or however old he is. It's one thing if you've got a guy like that who's got legitimate bumps and bruises, who's older, you know what I mean, who's banged up, and you say, listen, we're going to try and manage your minutes a little bit down the stretch here because, that's different to me than saying we're going to give a perfectly healthy guy a night off because we're trying to limit the number of minutes. To me, it's no different than the whole pitching thing, Adam, where nowadays guys can't pitch more than 4 innings without their arm falling off. It's like we have our access to the best training methods that we've ever had, and guys aren't able to play as much as they used to. It's irritating to me, but again, I'm an old crotchety guy yelling at clouds, so maybe I'm just a dinosaur.
No, I don't think you're a dinosaur. I guess the one thing I would say is that Jordan was Jordan for exactly the reasons that you're saying, and I think he was the exception to the rule. I don't think most guys back then were as tough as Jordan. I think that's part of what made him great and part of why people loved him. And other guys probably had to deal with injuries. And the second thing I'd say is sometimes I wonder if they had done a little bit of load management with Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang through all of their injuries over all these years. Maybe a couple of years could have gone differently for the Penguins. Sometimes I wonder just because I think if you're going to make a case for the load management, I think you start with those 3 guys and their Penguins careers because as successful as they've been, you wonder if they could have been more successful.
Well, see, here's in that sport where you have an opportunity for load management that's built in. I thought there was a few years that Fleury played too many games, and you give your goalie, giving your goalie nights off is something that happens in that league, where you can manage the number of games your goalie plays in the regular season. I thought there was a few years where he played too many games, but at the end of the day, are you really going to ask your fans? Are you really going to ask your fans to pay $200 a ticket, sit down, and then tell them, oh, by the way, the three best players are taking the night off? Or, you hear these, I think it was Colin Dunlap actually took his daughter up to Cleveland to see Golden State play, and it happened to be a night when Steph Curry was doing the load management thing. I don't know, man. I think that if you're healthy, you should play.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I just think
here's the other thing, Adam. Let me just say this. In an 82-game season in the NBA, there's a lot of games where you can sneak minutes, where, the game gets away one way or the other or whatever, where you can basically give a guy a fourth quarter off or, preserve some minutes that way without giving out, without basically saying we're going to give up the entire game.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's an interesting conversation because you can kind of argue it both ways. Paul, you wrote this week that the feelings of disappointment you have about the 2013 Pirates and kind of what followed, because we're going to be celebrating the 10th anniversary at opening day. I think A.J. Burnett's throwing out the first pitch to Russell Martin. You're going to be trying to evoke the feelings of that, catharsis of breaking the streak of losing seasons. But then, what's happened since then? They lost 2 wild card games. They never made it back to the main draw of the playoffs. And now they're coming to the end of a teardown process and trying to build back up to being like 2013 again. My question for you, Paul, because I think you argued things pretty well in your column. I want to look forward. Do you feel like we're moving toward a 2013 again? Can you see the pieces in place? Or do you feel like the Pirates are behind that 2013 pace? Sometimes I feel like they are.
Well, yeah, and I'll say this. I think, in the column that I wrote, I wasn't disappointed with 2013.
Right.
That, that I want to make that very clear. I want to clarify that. I was talking about how that was such a magical season for all of us, and it was incredible. And we all thought, boy, this is going to be a nice run here for the Pirates over the next 3, 4, 5 years. They're going to build on this, and they're back. But in reality, as opposed to it being a stop on the rise, it was basically the peak. And over the next 2 years, they got blown out in the wild card game. And of course, we can argue why those things happened. And after that, it kind of fell off a cliff. So now, looking at where we're at, my thing is, I felt like now looking back at that, man, 2013, we all thought they were rising. And really, that was probably the best that it got. I would say this. I could see this team maybe having some of the elements of 2011 or 12. Remember, 2012 and 11, they both, started out good and, they won some games and they showed you flashes. But at the end of the day, in the final 2 months, their depth caught up to them and some, injuries and things, caught up to them. But they showed flashes early in those seasons. In fact, I think that in 2012, they might have been in first place or within a game or two of first place, like July 31st or early in August, and then the whole thing fell off. And then I think, the year before that, it might have been the Jerry Mills year where, Jerry Mills call happens and they don't win a game for like 30 days after it. But, I do see some of the pieces in place. I do see the fact that they've got some younger guys that maybe we're going to start to see play. I mean, O'Neal Cruz is a guy with some power that if he continues to get better in the field and continues to get better at seeing the baseball and hitting more than he has, okay, now all of a sudden you've got someone maybe to build around. I mean, Brian Hayes, to me, his bat's got to get better, but you've got another guy that you can sort of build around. Again, maybe if they are able to sign Brian Reynolds, which I'm not sure they will or they won't, but if they do, you've got Ronzi Contreras, a young pitcher. You've got some elements and pieces to, finally starting to say, now, if some of these young triple and double A players who we've been hearing about for a lot of years now, it seems like, if some of them actually come through And then they go out and they add the A.J. Burnett kind of player and the Russell Martin kind of player. Who knows? Maybe next year they could be something where they make another run at things. But I have to see how this season plays out before I'm ready to go there fully go there.
Paul, do you have any concern about the news about AT&T Sportsnet this week? I think last week we talked a little, or maybe it was a couple weeks ago, we talked about, what does the future of the Pirates on TV look like? I think we're going to find out the answer a lot sooner than I think both of us expected. Do you have any concern about the possibility that the Pirates and Penguins both are going to lose a lot of television revenue? Do you think they're going to find a reasonable replacement for AT&T Sportsnet in the short term, and then potentially find something more stable for the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a concern because these regional sports networks they're finding they're not working out. So it's not like before when Fox Sports Pittsburgh turned into AT&T Sports or KBL turned into Prime Sports or whatever it was. Back in the day, all of the different manifestations of what it was. It's not like that right now. Here's where I would be concerned if I'm a fan. Like if I'm a fan, is that are we going to have to watch the Pirates and the Penguins on some sort of regional streaming service that costs money, a subscription service? That's what I would say is the major concern. And as you said, they need to generate revenue somehow. They need to generate revenue and find money, from their broadcast partners. That might be one way they achieve it, or hey, just a straight pay-per-view. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that it could go, where it's not good for us as consumers. So the hope is that Major League Baseball and even the NHL and NBA, because there's a number of NBA teams in different markets that are on their regional networks. Maybe they get together, sit down, and figure out how they can make it work and how all three leagues can be involved. I mean, that's really what they're going to have to do if they're going to keep it on television. But my big fear is that if it's going to be on television, it's going to be pay-per-view or some sort of a subscription service where you pay, $8.99 a month and you get, regional teams, including the Penguins and the Pirates and, whatever. I could see it so easily going that way. I think you could too.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that seems like the only way forward to me, Paul, because there's just not another mechanism than AT&T Sports that exists around here that can handle the distribution in the way we've become used to it. And it just feels like that's the direction we're heading. And maybe it'll be more consumer friendly if you can then feel better about cutting the cord to cable and saying, I'm putting my dollars in sports instead of, but you were basically keeping cable to watch the Penguins and Pirates, right? You were paying for Bravo and CNN and all those channels. Maybe it's better if you don't have to pay for those channels to watch your teams. I don't know.
That's going to be the question. That's what, listen, my kids are in their 20s. I can tell you that them and none of those three and none of their friends, none of them have cable TV. They all watch stuff they have streaming services. They watch it on their laptops, you know what I mean? Or whatever. My one son watches stuff on his phone. They don't have cable TV. So maybe this is just sort of the natural evolution of where it's going and how it's going to look, right? Where everything is basically almost like an a la carte menu. If you pick the channels that you want streamed and you know what I'm saying, you pay whatever the premium is and you go from there. I mean, it could be that's the way TV is in 5 or 10 years anyway. But if you're an older person, for instance, right, and you have cable TV and you're used to turning into the Pirates every night and the Penguins every night, you might be a little bit salty and not want to pay another premium, especially if you're on a fixed income. You want to pay, even if it's a small premium, to have to pay that to watch the Pirates and Penguins.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, and I wrote a story about it today. I'll include the link to that down in the description as well. Check it out, and we'll see how things go, Paul. Any final thoughts before I let you go?
No, like I said, I think it's going to be TV's changing anyway, and again, 20-somethings don't have cable TV. I've learned that just being around my kids and all of listen to talk to their friends, and it's amazing when I say, well, how do you watch TV? Because I'm an old guy, right? But they all subscribe to subscription to these streaming services, and that's how they watch what they want to watch, and they decide what they want to watch. And you know what? A lot of the garbage that's on TV, other channels that they don't want, they don't have to pay for. So, I mean, it could be the way that things are going anyway, but I don't know that really right now we're completely ready for that fully with respect to our regional broadcast of sports.
Yeah, it feels like an earthquake, but another way. I mean, here we are, two newspaper guys talking on YouTube, Paul, because that's where people are, right? So,
Right.
So you know, the evolution is natural. Paul, thanks for stopping by today. I know you got to run. We'll talk to you all next week. Paul will be back. We'll have another set of topics. These are always fun Thursday episodes. So thanks for stopping by. Please consider liking the video, subscribing, and checking out the subscription deal down in the description. $6, 6 months of access. We'll talk to you again next week. Thanks.
All right, guys. We'll see you.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.